Welcome to the Language of Excellence podcast. I'm your host, Nighbor. I want to welcome you to the show, whether you're watching this on YouTube live right now, or whether you're watching this on Facebook or listening to it on the podcast. I want to welcome you to the Language of Excellence. And if this is the first time that you've been here, make sure you go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And if this is your very first time on the show, listening to the show, the Language of Excellence is a podcast designed to help salespeople, business owners, and entrepreneurs live the language of excellence. And what that is that it's helping individuals like yourself consume the right information, take that information, put it into action, and create the outcomes that you want, create the results that you want in life. And I get the privilege, I get the honor to speak to, a number of authors, a number of sales professionals. And today I'm bringing on a gentleman that's been in the sales industry for 40 years. Like, how awesome is that? Last week I was talking to someone that's been in sales for less than 5 years. So this is going to be a really, really great interview. I'm really, really excited. Met this gentleman a handful of years ago, and he's got just as much excitement today that he did 5 years ago. And I could just imagine what he was early in on the sales careers. The gentleman that's going to be meeting with us today, his name is Chet Johnson. He's over in New Jersey. Again, he spent 40 years in the industry, and he's still active. He's still engaged. He's still helping. He's still serving. And that hunger, I don't think has gone away over these years. He's got a very large family, 16 grandkids. He's right on the water. I've seen some pictures that he's posted on social media, and it's been a pleasure to get to know this gentleman over the last few years. And I'm glad that we could get to dig in today to learn even more. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thank you, Nick. It's exciting to be here. 40 years, but that was prior to child labor laws. I was only 10 years old, so I'm not really that old, right?
Yes, exactly. Oh, yeah, because we don't want anyone to know that, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Well, so good to have you here on the show. And when I'm talking to different sales managers, sales leaders, sales professionals, I'm always curious because, especially with sales, I feel like a lot of people just fall into it somehow, some way. So tell the audience your story on how you got into sales.
Okay. So I grew up in Philadelphia, right? My career was in Philadelphia, born and raised in Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, first of all, you grow up fighting, and I'm talking literally and figuratively, right? So you got to get tough. So early in my career, like I started off as a paper route, and I increased paper routes. Like I'm like one of those stories. I was always driven by money. I don't know that I had work ethic at the time though. And then when I entered high school, prior to going to college, I got invited for an interview at a clothing store, and that was the first time. My sophomore year of high school, I went on a commission basis, and I started making money. I'm like, I can make money at this. And there again, I didn't necessarily have the discipline to go to med school or to become an attorney, like for the study portion of things. So I found sales to be my profession of choice, like where I thought I could, reach my dreams and goals. And lo and behold, you start to find your way in life through that.
Did you have like a specific interest or like an area of interest growing up? Like, hey, I really want to get into this, or like, what did that look like early on?
Yeah, early on in my career, I mean, I would say I was looking more for, I worked in fundraising and things like that, more in the gray area business. I left school early because I was so focused on making money. That was like my main driver, and I didn't really have the grind, and I didn't really have the long-term vision. And then my brother worked for at the time was part of Dun & Bradstreet, was Reuben H. Donnelly in the Yellow Page business. And I started my own agency at the age of 21, right? I had an ad agency, ended up selling the agency. And I figured, let me just step over to corporate and get some background, get some good stuff, and start building on a stronger foundation. And here I sit, 39 years later.
You started your own ad agency at 21 years old.
Yes.
Wow. That takes a lot of courage and sacrifice going into business for yourself that early on.
Yeah, well, or just dumb. You just don't know. I was always driven, to do it. And once I found sales, immediately upon joining like a sales organization, and I saw some structure and some training, and and that's when it started to come to me as like this could be my profession. And from that day forward, and that's not like a story, I've always treated this, and I remained in sales for up until 5 years ago. I was 100% in sales, and 5 years ago I transitioned into a training role, but we could talk about that later. But it was the first time I was like, hey man, I could become very professional and just kind of align myself with some different winners in the organization where I was working, right? And then to start finding some outside resources such as books and things like that, the Zig Ziglars of the world, and all the great books that were out there. Start reading them. I'm like, this is a true profession, and that's how I've always treated it since that time.
So when you were early on in your career, I guess, and this is usually a question I sort of ask towards like the end of the interview, but like what were some of those, were you involved in reading right away and listening and getting around? I mean, because it's a principle. It's
Yes.
talked about a lot today, but
yeah, I think for me, Nick, to be honest with you, it was more of a change of completely in my life, right? I grew up in the 70s and 80s. It was pretty wild times out there, right? My dream was to just make a boatload of money, like in the agency, and go travel and have fun. And that's what it looked like. And then the magic moment happened. I ran into a woman that became my wife, the woman of my dreams, right? And I had a child, and I was like, time to grow up. So at that time, I just started getting a hunger more for the grind of the business and just become excelling in everything that I did, and I had a life change, a spiritual life change in my life, where I made some decisions in my life, and everything just kind of, I don't want to say magically, because it became a whole lot of hard work, but things changed, quickly for me.
so early on, you already had that hunger to learn and grow.
Yes.
As I'm Brian Tracy, I'm sure you've heard of
Yeah.
Brian Tracy. I don't know why he sticks out in my mind. I wasn't always a reader. I really wasn't. And then when I got introduced to a door-to-door sales job in college, that's actually where like reading was introduced to me. And I remember reading Brian Tracy's book. I think it's a really small book. It's about like his journey when he went over to Europe, and pretty much just he needed some money. He went to go find a job, and he's explained this whole story. But part of the journey that he talks about is, working in the back end of a kitchen, eventually getting into sales. And then he asked this amazing question: what separates the people that are achieving versus me right now that's not achieving?
Yeah.
And as soon as he digested, as soon as he absorbed that principle, it was like a hockey stick for him. At least that's just what I learned from the books. So is there a book that's made like an impact for you, Greg?
I'd say, in looking back, I not one that particularly stands out, how to influence friends. And, later in my career, I think, I have things come to mind more now, like, the Challenger selling, but some of the original Zig Ziglar stuff, Brian Tracy, some of his early reads. I think for me, though, it was more of a place of removing, self-doubt. When we all grow up, we all have doubt in ourselves, insecurities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I came into a corporation, right, I had to start at the bottom rung, because my ad agency business was by telephone, right? I had to start on the phone, which was like probably 1/5 of what I was making the prior year, right? And when I got there, I started to look around, and it was like, wow, I can do, not that I'm better than anyone, but I can do this. And I started developing, a lot more like self-trust and self-respect. And I think that was in that life change cycle as well. And I always looked at, and I talk about it today, it's like, what's your reputation with yourself? That's what self-respect is. It's like, if I say I'm going to, what turned in my life was like, if I said I was going to do something, I did it. And I did it to the best that I could, and, I try to do that today in everything, but.
That reminds me of two books right away. I don't know if you've ever heard of Anthony Iannarino. I actually had him on the show a few weeks ago, and he talks about it in the book, the only sales guide you'll ever need. It's chapter 1 or chapter 2. He talks about me management.
Yeah.
Building trust with yourself. All right, I'm going to make 30 calls.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it. And every time that you say you're going to do something and you do it, you're building that personal trust.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think it's so much like, when we were talking, like when you sent me the thing over about success and defining success, like what's success? Well, it's different for each and every one of us. And, unless you have like I would consider like a desired vision and the thing comes with a vision is a plan, right? And that's the thing I think that lacks a lot of times. And I always look at like, well, what's success? If you compare it to someone else, or if I'm against Ken Jennings on Jeopardy, success could be answering one answer, right? And that could be success,
Right.
So everything is measurable in accordance to what we set out of our goals to be, So I don't know.
Defining your goals and making them yours.
Yes.
Versus having someone tell you what your goals are.
Yeah.
And you're not really invested in those goals. They told you, all right, this is what you have to do. But when you can make it your own and attach a result to it, that's when the game changes. So the last 5 years, you said that now you're doing sales training.
Yes. Correct.
So as a sales trainer now, I mean, you were active and engaged, and I don't think you can still pull yourself out of it because you're working with sales reps every day. But now that you've taken a handful of years outside, what would you say? Here's 2 questions. What would you say right now from your observations? What is it that separates the high performer from the person that's worried about getting that commission check?
Process, process. And, I could be cliche and say hard work, driving, but what I've noticed today is, that with the reps that I work with, when I go across the board, I spent when I first entered into the sales training, it was one of those little teas. I'm like, I had a little itch, right? I'm going to be honest with you. I was going to leave the company and I was going somewhere else. Right. And I kind of went to resign, and they're like, hey, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to do this. Well, like, will you try it here? I'm like, yeah, why not? So I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go in the field. And I picked, it was mostly just the East Coast at the time because I was not covering the whole country, but I spent about 150 days riding in the field with the top reps, like looking for that secret sauce,
Mm-hmm.
And then you come to realize there's no secret sauce, right? It's all about process. And ultimately it comes down to, and this is a little cliche, people buy from people they like and trust. But then, you have to, I say there's a lot of people I like and trust, but I wouldn't necessarily trust them with my grandkids, right? So then you also have to have some credibility in the industry and things like that. And then again, after that, I think the next layer is to just have process and to be able to relate to people, to be able to communicate with them, understand what, and I'd say that one of the greatest skills that I had, that was probably, I would almost call it like a God-given talent, is the ability to gain clients' trust, right? And respectfully earn that trust and deliver to that trust, right? And, I think back even to this day, I still have my hand in sales. I still have a couple $1 million in revenue. And I get invited to my clients, weddings, Christmas parties, things like that. It's the ultimate compliment to to be able to build a moat around my accounts and my clients, and that's kind of like the element I would teach, going forward.
So your answer is process.
Process.
So you got a brand new rep, they're in a new job, doesn't really matter the industry. How does a brand new sales rep create a process? Where do they start? What do they do?
So I think as a company, the first thing you have to do is to have some bars, right? Like here's the qualifications for the job, right? You reach the job. Here's what the expectations are. And I always talk about, what's expectations at quota. There's a great book out there by Jeb Blount, Fanatical Prospecting. Do you ever read that? Like, it probably lays out for any person entering a new field, like as it relates to building prospects and pipelines. I don't think there's a greater book than that, And actually, I'm actually in a book club for that right now with the entire training team. And it's amazing. It's so many of the things that I always knew to be true, but to have them, pointed out point by point. So that would be my answer, is to develop the process and to have commitment. Like, and what I noticed about all the different people, right? The different top reps, they didn't necessarily do it all the same way, but the fundamental principles were the same for all of them, right? They had set times for prospecting. They had set times for working with, existing client base. They had, and they held themselves accountable to that process. And same today, that's where success is.
That's a really interesting answer. Like I agree with you on the process, because we've talked about atomic habits in the past.
Yes.
What does he talk about? He doesn't call it process. He calls it systems.
Systems. Yep.
And then you're talking about fanatical prospecting. I had his son on my podcast last week, Jeb Blunt Jr., and that is one of the most recommended books. I got like 3 or 4 other ones that I recommend, but fanatical prospecting, he asks such great questions in that book that make you really, you really need to engage in your craft with that book, because you are going to change something, and it's worth reading over and over and over again and just studying it, because learning is exponential.
Yes. And something's interesting in the conversation the other day. We were talking, like, I had to keep going back and looking that the book was written 7 years ago, right? 7 years ago. And it was if it was written today. Like I have, you've seen probably from some of my sales success videos I do. I have a library, a literal full library in my house, but yet 2 books that I keep right at arm's reach for every rep is these 2 books, right? Fanatical Prospecting, Atomic Habit. It's funny you nailed them both, right? But they're the ones, like I have a full library, but they're the ones I think, particularly in the early stages of a rep. I get to speak to every single new hire in our company. And the first thing I tell them is, I used to just be Atomic Habits. I used to just tell them, read 1 book, right? Read 1 book. And now I'm up to read 2 books. It was funny. And in his book, he talked about, and it was a process that changed my life, was like, outlearn, out-earn, right? He talks about, if you outlearn, you outlearn. And I remember him saying in there, I may get it wrong because it's kind of top of my mind, but there's 250 work days a year. And if you were to take 15 minutes to invest in your career, right? And just do, whether it's a podcast, reading a book, by the end of that, you would reach 62 or 63 hours. And, we're not talking about War and Peace, but if it was a normal book, like a normal sized book like this, you would have read 18 to 21 books. I forget what it was in a year's period. And yet we run into sales professionals that read 0 to 1. And I'm like, how's that possible? Right.
Isn't it amazing? It's just crazy. Ever since I started reading myself, as I've talked to other people, because there's different activities that you and I both do every single day, whether it's time with family, time in business, growing clients, taking care of, just all the stuff that's happening. And I got my desk here, you can't see it. And I got 3 or 4 books on them. And every time I read a book, what happens is I get more hungry to read more books. It's the one thing, it's the one activity that I can think of that increases over time. Cause I can't think of anything else where, okay, I get done with that book. Now that book just referenced 4 other books. Like, all right, now where do I go? It's like it's like a candy store almost. It's really weird for the non-readers that are listening or watching this. You're probably like, what's wrong with you, Nick? Like, you get into reading and you see what it can do for you. Like, reading can change your life. This is the name of this podcast is called the Language of Excellence Podcast. The number 1 step to live the language of excellence is to read on a daily basis, because if you can do that, you're opening the door to change in your life. If you don't read and you get no new information, you've closed the door to change and progress.
Yeah.
That's how strongly I feel about books. And I think that's probably why you and I have had such good conversations, is because both of us are readers, whether it's listening or just listening or reading, and just plugging into the right stuff. Right.
Yeah. And I think what it does also, it makes us winsome, it makes you intriguing, when you're talking with a client. And I read, like a lot of business type periodics and stuff. I keep up on the stock market and all, but that's the things I talk about with my clients. Very, that's where I'm building relationship with them, because I'm finding common ground, and I'm not reading to do that. Right. I'm just finding common interests with them, and we bond, and and it's just, and I've heard on your podcast the same thing. Like in life, if there's one thing you could do beside that process, the reading and all that, it's just that align yourself with some positive people in your life, make yourself accountable, reach the goals. And I always talk to the new hires about, I don't know if you read about redwood trees, right? Greatest tree, largest tree in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And withstanding the top winds, and the top thing about them, you would think they have the deepest root system, and yet their root system is one of the most shallow root systems. However, they go out 100 feet, and they intertwine with all the other redwoods. And I try to get people to say, man, hey, I tell people all the time the same thing. I say, if I have a bad day and I want like somebody else to bring me down, I have those people I could call. They would bring me right to the bottom. But I want to call the Nick Nibors and say, hey man, I'm having a tough day. Like, pick me up. And I still have tough days, right? 40 years, you still have these self-doubt or rough day. I need somebody to say, you're really good at this, man. Pick it up, get going, So
the power of community.
Yes.
Correct. And that's actually where I want to get into my next question here. I run masterminds for other sales professionals and business owners, and getting around other driven, other motivated people wanting to learn let's dig a little bit more into that. Like, what is the impact, and maybe even speak to that new salesperson? Like, what's the impact of getting around a community of people that can support, encourage, and hold you accountable?
It's a difference in the world. I mean, sales is particularly I'm in the digital space, right? You know that. So digital space, if you're having a high success rate, you're probably getting less than 1%, positive feedback from a client, right? So what do you do with all that negativity? You have to process that. I still, I know some sales reps like to say, 20 no's get me closer to you. I still get heartbroken on one no. Like, I take it personal, which I'm saying that in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way. But right. I think the key element is to, particularly in the early stages, if you don't interlock, right? Because you're going to have bad days. You're going to have them. It's going to be frustrating. You're going to question, is this something I should be doing? Am I called to this business? Is there somewhere else? And if you're always looking, you're always going to be looking, kind of thing. So I try to get people first to align, if they're new sales reps, to align with a couple other positive sales reps that are in the team that they're with today. If not, then after that, get to your team. And then sometimes you have to leave the industry. You have to find the nicks and all that in outside places, and try to align there. But that's kind of the goal of my life, is always just to be around positive people. It's a lot more fun too, right? Like we all have negative people you're around. You're like, oh, like I don't even want to be there. Yeah. But.
Yes, you want to just surround yourself. Just when you get done meeting with a group of people that are like really forward thinking, like as soon as you leave that group, you're like, all right, like you feel like you want to, like you can attack the world. Like you could just go out and just do really, really big things. If you just get around negative people that are just complaining all the time and letting all the external noise affect them, affect their energy, affect their attitude, like that ain't fun. That ain't fun at all. So my last question here, just to close out the podcast, you've been in advertising for 40 years. You've been in sales. You've been really a sales manager, but still in the field, still running a book of business. Most of the people that are listening to this, they're all in sales. How would you, Greg, define the language of excellence in the sales realm?
The language of excellence is probably the key to everything. Is just, first when you speak about language and excellence together, right? You have to know first, define what is excellence, right? And excellence for every person could be a different mark, right? And it's a moving mark. As if anything we do, I know you're a runner, right? Each time you add on to that, the compounding of first, right? I think is the key. And that's where excellence build, right? You didn't run your first, marathon, right? You start with a mile, you start 5K, 10K, whatever it is. And I think the compounding of everything and just continuing to raise the bar on yourself is the beginning of the language of excellence. And then you have podcasts like this, things to align with, right? And to learn from people that have excelled in certain areas of the business, I think is key. Did I answer that properly? I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
raising the bar, taking in new information to help move. And you're totally right, Greg. Everyone's definition is different. Some people are money and material motivated, and some people are more motivated intrinsically. Like they just want to earn the respect of their coach, or they want to earn the respect and loyalty of their family. Like we are all wired differently. The assignment here is, do you know how you're wired? Like Greg, I'm pretty sure you know how, but the listener, this is a good question for anyone listening to this. What motivates you? Like what actually drives you that's going to help you wake up with energy, ready to attack the day? If you don't know what that is, then you're wasting every day. Find out what that is. And that's, you might chew on that for a little while, because that's the beauty of reading books and listening to podcasts, or just listening to the right information. You start to ask the right questions. You learn more about yourself, learn more about other people. You bring more value to the marketplace. And guess what? You end up getting compensated for the value that you bring to the marketplace. So what is the best way for the listeners to find you online? Are you on social media, Greg?
I'm on social media under Greg Chet Johnson on Facebook. I do have a LinkedIn page. Or you can email me at avalonchet@gmail.com, and hopefully you can include that there. I'm available to help. I want to see you succeed and win. I love when people do well. I love change, right? Reinventing yourself is the key. Just think about 40 years in a business, right? How many times I had to reinvent myself. Like, and I'm not kind of patting myself on the back. I align with the right people to help me realign, to start changing my goals, my values. And then you always have the young bucks like Nick coming up. I want to be strong. I want to go head to head,
Mm-hmm. Yes. So if you're listening to this or watching this and you want to connect with Greg, check him out on Facebook. He's got a LinkedIn profile. Otherwise, you can always email him as well. That information, those links for Greg, they'll be in the show notes for you as well. So then you can just click on, if you want to reach out to him. He is someone that wants to give back to the sales profession. He's someone that wants to raise the profession of sales. He's not trying to hold secrets. He wants to give everything that he knows so he can help other people raise their game. Thanks so much for being on the show here today, Greg. I really appreciate it, and have an awesome day.
Great catching up. Thank you.